Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Museum of the City of New York. My name is Fran Rosenfeld, and I'm the Director of Public Programs here. And tonight we are very excited to present Faith in the Five Boroughs, which is the second program in our series, our season 2 of our series, Only in New York, hosted by Sarah Maslin Nir. In case you haven't attended a program in our series yet, Only in New York is a bi-monthly conversation hosted by New York Times journalist Sarah Maslin Nir, which brings together 2, sometimes 3, remarkable New Yorkers from different worlds to examine key concepts and commonly held beliefs about life in the city, its limits, and its possibilities. The series is inspired by our museum's new permanent exhibition, which is celebrating its 1-year anniversary this week, actually. And we have a brand new or 1-year-old exhibition on the first floor called New York at its Core, 400 Years of New York History. And we bring to life in this conversation series the themes explored in the core, which for those of you who have visited know that the argument in the core is that New York City, the essential DNA of New York City, can be described as consisting of 4 qualities, which you find in New York in extremes unlike where you'd find anywhere else. And those qualities are money, or including the pursuit of money, density, diversity, and creativity. And how these 4 characteristics work together and inform the lives and experiences of New Yorkers is the subject of the exhibition and the subject of basically everything that we're going to talk about in this series. So if you haven't had a chance to visit the core, I do invite you to come back soon. We're open every day 10 to 6. For tonight's program about the role of faith and faith communities in the city, we are very honored to have 3 distinguished New Yorkers. Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum of Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, which happens to be the world's largest LGBT synagogue. We have Pastor Kenneth Hart. I think he has some congregants here. The self-proclaimed hood pastor of unorthodox, very interesting new church in Harlem. And Dr. Debbie Almontaser, who is board president of the Muslim Community Network and a scholar. And just a word for those of you, we did have actually an Imam Shamsi Ali, who was to participate tonight. Unfortunately, his father has fallen ill and he was not able to return to New York as hoped. So he sends his apologies, but we're thrilled to be able to welcome Dr. Almontaser, who's a longtime friend of the museum. And it only disrupts a little bit the byline joke of the description for this talk, which was a pastor, a rabbi, and an imam walk into a museum. So now they did walk in, one walked out, but then Dr. Debbie walked back in, so it's all okay. And following this program, we invite everyone to join us upstairs in the museum's rotunda for a light reception. You can chat with the speakers, and we are serving both non-alcoholic beverages and beer courtesy of Harlem Blue. And I'd like to just say a brief thank you to the promotional partners for tonight's program, which include some wonderful organizations and sites and departments, including A Journey Through NYC Religions, the Columbia University Office of the University Chaplain, Fordham University Judaic Studies, the New York Disaster Interfaith Services, and the NYC Muslim-Jewish Solidarity Committee. And you can find a complete list of partners in your program. We're really appreciative of their support. Last major thing is I'd like to invite you to come back in January for the next installment of our series. The name of the January conversation is Gender and Justice. And we have a conversation with Manhattan Assistant District Attorney Lucy Lang and prison reform activist and leader Reverend Vivian Nixon. And they're going to talk about the extremely vexed but still evolving relationship between gender and justice in this city and beyond. And that takes place here January 17th. Please check out the website for more. At this time, I'd want to ask you to turn off anything that beeps or buzzes, but tweet away at hashtag MCNY Live. And now I would like to introduce and welcome our moderator, Sarah Maslin Nir, and our 3 distinguished speakers to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah? So, as per usual, I have brought out the only in New York bottle of wine, but also the only in New York cranberry juice to reflect the diversity of New York and faiths. So, I wanted to... We all set? We got everything? You all set? Yeah. All right. On the couch? Yeah. Relax, enjoy the couch.
It's comfy. It's a comfy couch.
Yeah. My parents are therapists, so so get on the couch.
My wife's a therapist, so I don't know.
Only in New York is designed to celebrate the core, the exhibit, and to sort of augment it. And the core is broken into 3 galleries. Fran didn't tell you this part yet, did she? She did. 3 galleries: past, medium, past, future. No. Hey. Oh. The 3 galleries of the core are sort of the city as it came to be the city we know today, describing the native peoples live there and the laying out of the grid plan and how different groups evolved throughout the city. And the second gallery is the long 20th century. Is that right, Fran? Yeah. That's sort of, the 1900s up to our stopping point here is Hurricane Sandy and understanding the recent city. And then there's the Future City Lab, which is a room where you can play city councilman and you can mess around with different data points, and you can even project a park on the wall that your little avatar can walk through, and you can figure out the city, what it will look like in the future. And I like to call this talk the Gallery of the Now. So imagine this as the 4th gallery. This is the place where we figure out the city as it is. And I would like to convey here this kind of conversations you have, in the back of a cab or on a line in New York City where you meet someone you never met before and you hear a perspective you never met and you kind of leave a better person. And I think those are really only in New York moments. And I want to cultivate that here. And these are the people to do it. Also, can we give a hand for Dr. Almontaser for showing up? Thank you. I'm so excited to hear her perspective, so thank you so much. As much as we have an interfaith panel, I don't want it to be exclusively an interfaith conversation, because there are all certain points we can agree on, which is we gotta all get along. And New York is nowhere better to demonstrate that, the most diverse city in the world and also the most peaceable. And I want to start this conversation, though, speaking about each faith, its impact on the city, and the city's impact on it. And I thought I'd actually start with you, Rabbi. You had a fascinating story about specifically how your congregation or the demographic of your congregation has shaped the city. Could you talk a little about your congregation and its history?
Sure. My congregation Beit Simchat Torah, which is New York City's, how do we call it? LGBTQS, or started as the gay synagogue in 1973. We keep adding letters to it, and now we have a very vibrant non-gay demographic in the community. But when the congregation started in 1973, and we have to think back to what New York was like in 73, what the world was like in 73, what religion was like in 1973, it was a really radical act that this small group of gay people, gay Jews, said, well, we don't want to choose between being gay or being Jewish. And that was really what the choice was at that time. There was not a single rabbi, not a single synagogue, not a single Jewish organization in 1973 which said it was okay to be gay and Jewish at the same time. Wow. Not a single one. So the faith, I think, that it took for these few people to say, you know what, we don't care what the institutions say about us. Right. We no longer will have to make the choice between being gay and leaving the Jewish community, or being Jewish and denying that we're gay. And that was really the choice up until then. And so on one Friday night in February, and it's the apocryphal founding story, a group of gay, mostly men, said, let's have a Friday night Shabbat service where we can be both deeply Jewish and openly gay at the same time. Wow. They didn't set out to be revolutionaries, but it was a revolutionary act that, now we have a congregation of thousands, and we rent out the Jacob Javits Center for the high holidays we have 4,000 people. And it's now become a rich and meaningful religious community to which everybody of every sexual orientation and gender identity is welcome. Wow. And I think that's an example of what New York is. It can be this a place in which things can incubate ideas and people, and these people could say to themselves, I want to try this because this is true to who I am. I'm not going to reject Judaism because Judaism has rejected me. I'm going to insist on my right to remain part of the Jewish community, even if it means creating my own piece of the Jewish community, which is such a deeply powerful statement of faith, right? To say, even though all the interpreters of my tradition have told me I don't belong,
Right.
I'm going to say I belong, and that is going to make me belong. And those small steps, almost none of those original founders are alive. Most died from AIDS. And this is what it's about, is we take steps to create the world that we want to see. And we pray and hope there'll be others to carry on, even if we don't reach the promised land. Our job is to do whatever we can to create the world we want to see. And in that place, you know, and in 1973, there was no state in the United States which recognized gay rights. There was no such thing as marriage equality. There was no... And I think it's a profound expression of faith that a people who is oppressed can say, we don't accept that definition of who we are that's coming at us from the outside.
Well, I also think it plays into, I want to understand how New York impacted that. And the curators of this exhibit created sort of a math equation to understand the city, which actually, as you were saying it, I was like, oh, there's the math equation, which is the idea that New York has these things in such replete numbers that a unique thing happens here. And the equation is diversity, density, money, the having of and not having, equals creativity. And it's what drove the grid plan, the subway, you know, these monumental inventions and innovations. And I imagine that there was nowhere else on Earth at that moment that had the density of gay Jews simply to meet each other. And I just came from a women's conference, a panel where I was speaking about women's empowerment, and it called to mind, there's a tangent, but it'll come around, trust me, that Gloria Steinem says the importance of having women's networks or networks of people who feel they are underrepresented is simply for the ability to turn to each other and go, wait, you too? I'm not crazy?
Right.
And that's what these people found, and I think that could probably only happen in New York.
It was happening in Los Angeles, to be fair, which is the other city in which there's a tremendously large gay and Jewish community. There are differences in the communities, but it did happen in LA in a similar time. New York had also, of course, Stonewall had taken place 4 years earlier. There was a sense of transformation in the gay community, which gave these folks some strength. And I have to say, it came from a Christian priest of an Episcopal church on the west side of the Church of the Holy Apostles, who had been let known to the gay community that it was a safe church to have a discussion group called the West Side Discussion Group, which took place through the late 60s. And some of CBST members were gay members, part of this discussion group. Notice the word gay doesn't appear anywhere in the name of the group. And it was happening in a Christian setting, so they knew that he would be open to letting them start but only in New York. That priest ended up becoming a born-again, anti-gay, evangelical priest and rejected his earlier stuff. But once again, we never know who will push us forward. Only in New York.
Dr. Almontaser, can you speak to the trajectory of the Muslim experience in New York, as you're familiar with it?
Yeah.
Well, the American Muslim experience is really one that's very fascinating, and I always like the opportunity to have a chance to share about it. Muslims, came to the United States as far back as the time of slavery. And there is even research
I didn't even know that. You told me that earlier. It blew my mind.
Yeah. There is even research that states that they even came before Columbus and other parts of the Americas. So people really don't have that sense of understanding about it. And when we talk about New York City, I think there are two places that are monumental that really show the depth and breadth of the American Muslim community. And that is actually Lower Manhattan, where you have the African burial site. People who were found there were actually Muslim, and there were artifacts there that showed that these were Muslims who were buried there. So going back as far back as that, and that's the African American experience of people being Muslim and tracing their roots. One of the things that people don't know is 20% of the slave trade was actually of African American Muslims, of African Muslims. And so there's a really, rich history there that people don't know. During the time of slavery, many of these people actually practiced Islam privately and secretly because they were afraid of what their slave masters were going to do to them. And so, for those who braved it, it's really incredible. And you can see in a great deal of history their contributions to society. But going back to New York City, I think it's also very important to also pay homage to the immigrant communities that also came to New York City. So for those of you who know Lower Manhattan, St. John Street and near the World Trade Center area, that used to be called Little Syria. And the first mosque to be known in New York City actually was in Little Syria. There was an article that was written in March of 1912 talking about this little mosque.
Wow.
And this little mosque was actually found by Syrians who came in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
And was that the
actually
neighborhood
lived
that was
there.
wiped out by the World Trade Centers being built?
Well, one of the things that happened was as the community grew, they were being pushed out because of rent and what have you.
Yeah.
So they moved to downtown Brooklyn. And over the course of the years, they are now moved into Bay Ridge and further, and now there are people who are in Staten Island, people who live in the Bronx, again, because of gentrification and the high rate. And I always love telling the story of the downtown Brooklyn because that actually pays homage to my community, the Yemeni American community. When they first migrated after the third wave of immigration in the late 60s, many Yemeni Americans arrived to downtown Brooklyn, the Borough Hall area. I don't know how many of you here know the Almontaser's restaurant, if you are Brooklynites. Yep, I see some hands.
I see hands.
The Moroccan Star.
Delicious.
The Near East. There are a whole slew of restaurants that were there, and those were actually run and operated by members of my family, uncles
Wow.
and cousins. And the only one that's left is Yemen Cafe. How many people know Yemen Cafe? Okay, you really got to go there. It's actually on Lonely Planet, where actually tourists go and eat there.
Oh, wow.
I think, Harold, are you here? I think we need to do a field trip.
Yeah.
We're going to do a field trip.
Well,
Hey, Harold.
So it's so interesting to me that, I'm sitting here. I'm a student of New York City. I run this talk. I spend all this time in the museum, and I didn't know the sort of primacy that Muslims had in the city's history. And it speaks to me. This is going to sound another real big tangent, but I'm writing a book about horses.
Not random at all.
I've learned as I'm writing this, I'm writing about the American West, and that a huge majority of cowboys were black, and they were slaves. Even the word cowboy indicates disrespect to a black man. You would call a cattleman, and their story was erased by Hollywood and by people who didn't want that to be the message. And it just called to mind, I wonder how much agency, when Nicole Hannah-Jones was here speaking about segregation in the city, she reminded everyone that New York was a slave city, and we try to pretend we're not.
Yes, it was.
And so how much of immigrant story and religion stories are erased by, the victors or the dominant force. I want to move on to, away from horses, sorry, to Pastor Hart.
I like horses, though.
Yeah, good. Me too, a lot.
Oh.
Pastor Hart, I'm going to ask you the same question, but a slightly different permutation.
Okay.
Not how Christianity has been shaped by the city,
Right.
But how your Christianity and faith has been shaped by the city. Because
Absolutely.
you told me it caused you to lose faith and it caused you to find faith. Will you talk about your story?
Yes, absolutely.
And also tell people what you are.
I'm the hood pastor, y'all. So if you've never met a hood pastor, holla. I got my people right over here, so they know. Well, I'm glad you didn't ask me how did Christianity shape the city because, honestly, that's a big conversation. And so the way Christianity shaped me in the city was, so I grew up in Harlem, born and raised. I'm a Harlem boy, a few blocks from here, actually. And so for me, I grew up walking these streets and seeing churches on every corner. And so I'm black, and I come from a tradition of black church where it was almost assumed that if you were black and you lived in Harlem, you went to church. There wasn't the grandma drug you to church. And so you didn't have a choice. And so for me, growing up in an unchurched home, my family actually kind of was different. Like, we kind of broke that narrative. We were Christmas and Easter Christians, and so we didn't go to church at all. And part of the reason why Christianity was very unattractive to me, one of them was a personal story. So my mom, I'm actually black and Italian. I'm mixed. I look Spanish, but I'm actually not. Even though all the ladies in my block speak to me in Spanish. So, but I'm actually black and Italian. My mom is, and so growing up kind of mixed, being half white, even though my Italian family would kill me if I called them white, but being half white and yet being perceived as black was something that I couldn't reconcile. That didn't make sense to me. And then I went to a Catholic school in Harlem where I would walk, where in my school, Jesus was blonde hair with blue eyes. He had the fresh perm. He had the blue eyes. You know, Jesus was pretty. And then I would walk down 125th Street, where I'm from in Harlem, and I would talk to Rastafarians, which is an offset of Christianity. And my Rasta friends, who I would buy oils from, would have a Jesus who was black with dreads. He looked like Bob Marley. And so for me, seeing Jesus as a hippie and Bob Marley didn't make sense to me. I didn't know philosophy then, but there is a law called non-contradiction, and that just seemed to contradict itself. So I knew Jesus couldn't be both. And then on another level, my mom died when I was 9. She was killed. And so for me, I just...
In a car accident.
Yeah, in a car accident. My mother was hit by a car. And so for me, then kind of trying to wrestle with faith and loss and grief, that didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand. My mom was the best person I knew. So I couldn't understand why, if there was a God, he would take my mother from me in the way he did. She actually died helping a friend. So she died the way she lived. And so for me, it didn't make sense. And so all of these things were kind of converging and coming together to make me very hostile to Christianity. And so I would walk the streets and I would play over needles as a kid, and then I would see all these Christians going to church on Sunday. And I'm like, how can there be so much brokenness in this neighborhood, and yet so many people claim that they love God and know God? I didn't see a faith that actually touched the ground. And for me, I'm living on the ground. We had our lights cut off. I was called the N-word. Not here in New York, thankfully, but when I traveled the country, I was followed in stores. Yes, here in New York. Followed. Can I help you? No, I actually have money in my pocket. I'm here to buy something, right? But they followed me, right? I saw white people cross the street when I walked down the block, right? And I have no criminal record, y'all. I just want to throw that out there. But even if I did, is that the way we perceive black bodies? And so I just didn't see a Christianity that touched the ground and that touched my experience. So it just didn't make sense to me. Long story short, I went away to college. I had a baseball scholarship to get out the city. And for some reason, I don't know what it was. I mean, baseball was my God at the time, and it started to fail me. I thought I was going to get drafted, y'all. I actually didn't think I would be Pastor K. I thought I would be a baseball player doing a different kind of talk here.
You still bleed pinstripes, though.
I still do bleed pinstripes, but you know, I'm the hood pastor, so I also bleed chopped cheese grease. And so if you're from uptown, you know what I'm talking about. So I think I just kind of fell on my knees one night, and I was like, you know, Jesus, if you're real, was kind of how my prayer started. And I didn't even know if Jesus was real. I didn't know who this Jesus even was. I didn't know if he was blonde hair hippie Jesus. I didn't know if he was Rastafarian Jesus. But I just said, if you're real, Jesus, changed my life. And got up, said amen, and picked the Bible up, haven't put it down since. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to continue back to you, because I could listen to you talk forever. Each of you could just sit here by yourself, and we would all be wrapped. So you developed the Unchurch. Yes. Explain this to me.
Yeah, so we say at the gathering, which is the name of our church, that we want to be a church for the unchurched. And what I feel like often happens is, I think traditional Christianity and traditional religion, because I think all of us can kind of attest to that narrative, but traditional religion throws away a huge segment of people that God loves. And we just felt like, as a church, we weren't being an accurate reflection of what we believed if we just kind of lined up and did status quo things. And so I always said, if God called me back to New York to start a church, I would start a church that the 17-year-old me would have went to. The 17-year-old me was looking for acceptance. The 17-year-old me was looking for a place where I could belong, but also a place that cared deeply about the issues that affected my community. The 17-year-old me wanted to see a movement of people that actually touched the ground with their faith, with what they claimed they believe, that they actually spoke to issues of race and justice and those kind of things that affected me every day. And so when God and his providence called me back home, that's the kind of church we started. So we say at the Gathering, we're a church for the unchurched, meaning we're a church for everybody. That's really what it means.
Can you just give us a slice of who that everybody is?
Yeah, I mean, we have people in our church literally from all walks of life. I actually think that that's the goal of religion, to bring people together that could never have come together another way, right? If we all got together, like look at this group right here. This is a testament to the power of faith, right? Faith can bring together a diverse group like this. If we all look the same, vote the same, make the same amount of money, have the same education background, then what good is that? We're an affinity community. We're not any kind of religious community, any kind of community that can make a real impact in the world. And so for me, I just said, man, we need to have black, we need to have white. We need to have Hispanic, we need to have Asian, we need to have poor, we need to have rich, we need to have gay, we need to have straight. I mean, our church literally has everybody from all walks of life. We have people with criminal records, we have people that have graduated from Harvard. That's the narrative that we think the church should be telling. And so
I think your church speaks volumes about your soul, but I also think it speaks volumes about this city.
It does.
And I had an interesting experience the other day. I was going to get on a flight to Canada early in the morning at JFK, and underneath an overpass that I was walking through with my baggage were all of these Muslim cab drivers praying, lying on the ground. And it was so beautiful because there was a guard watching over them, and that Kennedy Airport had sanctioned this place. Yeah, sure, it was gritty, but it had created a space for these people. And Dr. Almontaser, I wanted to speak to you about that. We spoke about the city creating a safe place for Muslims in a way that other places haven't, especially at this moment. And I was really moved by that.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I love New York so much, is because you are able to be whoever you want to be in your skin. And there is no judgment, and people are welcoming and embracing. And, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we are the cosmopolitan city of the world. Yeah. People coming from every part of the world, speaking every language you can possibly think of. I mean, how many of you have stood on a street corner and heard at least 5-6 languages being spoken? All right? Sure. How many of you have seen people walking down the street and their ethnic clothing and just simply appreciate that and celebrate that diversity? Yeah. And that's really what New York has become for New York Muslims, regardless of where they come from, is that they've been able to really, feel a sense of integration and connection, and be able to pray, feeling safe and comfortable, because people just know that, people come from all parts of the world. And, when I first came to New York City, I found my way to Islam through the African American Muslim experience. Wow. My parents raising us in upstate Buffalo were a part of the assimilation crew, where when I came, my dad was always telling us, don't talk about where you came from, your culture, your religion, the language that you speak. You're in America now, you're American. And it was only when I became a middle schooler and I came home telling my dad that I was asked to go on a date by a boy. And that's when he was like, well, we don't really date. But if you really want to go to this party, I will take you to the party. And that's when I first started to have more of my religious upbringing being introduced to me. And even then, because it wasn't really rich and it wasn't one that my parents even knew themselves, like what Islam was truly about, it was as a young adult, soul searching and seeking and taking world religion classes in college, that I simply was saying, what is my purpose in the world? And I saw 3 African American women walking on Atlantic Avenue, going to the Islamic Mission of America. And I stopped them and I asked them if they were Muslim. And they told me they were. They told me where they were going. And I said to them, wow, I'm really inspired. It's just you guys just mesmerized me because you walked, nobody said anything to you, you're just minding your business, but really happy. And they said to me, why don't you come with us to the mosque? And I said to them, well, I don't know, I'm not dressed, I have jeans and a t-shirt, my hair is out. They're like, don't worry, nobody's gonna judge you. And when I went with them that day, I was shocked to see the vast diversity of women that were there. There were Hispanic women, Asian women, Caucasian women. Wow. And this was just a support group of women coming together to learn about Islam who basically converted. And I continued to go to that class, and that's when I really found myself. And it's really incredible. It's really incredible.
Well, so we spoke about the ways in which New York City has embraced and ratified and protected, especially lately, the Muslim community with the travel ban, with these incredible protests that happened spontaneously, people congregating at airports. I believe your synagogue was deeply involved with that.
And so was Debbie. You say spontaneously, but
Not spontaneously.
my father always said the most spontaneous demonstration is the one that's well planned. And actually, what makes New York important and about all these things? That first of all, there are deep relationships that exist among the different religious communities, so that when something happens, there are already relationships in place. So that we can network together. And a great example is when that violent attack took place on the West Side Highway. And in many other places of the world, that would have turned into a massive anti-Islam, Muslim bashing. You can imagine. In New York City, Debbie contacted me and a few other people, and we were on the phone in a couple of hours planning a multi-faith vigil for the next day. That it represented, I think there were 30 different religious groups or something like that involved in organizing that. And that happened immediately. And so that the next day, in response to that, we could have a vigil of all these different religious traditions rejecting violence in the name of God, standing together, making sure that Muslims would not feel under attack. And that is because New York has a fabric of connection that exists so that when something happens, and when the Muslim ban was announced, the first one back in, what was that? For January. That was on the Saturday afternoon. The word went out. By Saturday night, all of us were at JFK. So it requires, it's spontaneous only in that but what's not spontaneous is there are deep connections that we can draw on with each other to we don't have to go through dialogue groups and discussion groups, and we're already connected.
Actually, Imam Shamsi, who is not here, how I met him was the Muslim Day Parade. He actually had a rabbi as the Grand Marshal.
Wow.
And it had never, ever been done before. That was a couple months ago, and I wrote about it. And nobody blinked. Nobody blinked. Everyone, the beginning of the Muslim Day Parade, it's on Madison Avenue. They've roped off a portion of it. The men are lying down on the ground, and then in a separate section, the women are lying down on the ground, and there's this huge moment of absolute devotion, and a rabbi standing over it like this. And nobody blinked. And it was incredible. And it was certainly only in New York. And the fact that that parade could stay safe and be in that situation, that there wasn't, not just no blinking, it was embraced. But Dr. Almontaser, I want to turn it back to you one more time again. In other ways, New York has been very hostile to the Muslim community, and you have some very interesting and ongoing specific examples of that.
Sure. I think that we have to, look at policies that are made and the impact that they have on communities. So
Absolutely.
in the aftermath of September 11th, under the Bloomberg administration, the NYPD decided to actually create a surveillance unit that was surveilling American Muslims. And for years, we had not known that they were surveilling our community. And it was only through the release of confidential documents that were actually published in the Associated Press that we came to learn that our communities were actually being surveilled. And the surveillance was so intrusive. It was as intrusive as simply spying on a bakery, going into that bakery and purchasing something and just lingering in the store to hear what the bakery owner was talking about and the people in it. The butcher
Probably
shop,
bread. Just
the
putting it out
restaurant. And the irony of it, when I saw those documents and some of the places that they actually targeted were like Sahadi's. How many of you know Sahadi's in downtown Brooklyn? Okay. Charlie Sahadi is Christian.
Yes,
Wow.
that part of Atlantic Avenue.
That's
Or
dumb.
Damascus
Wow.
Bakery. The owners of Damascus Bakery are Christians. So, like, they just were doing this blindly and wasting millions of dollars doing this
Wow.
and coming up with zero, and I mean zero leads. And what it caused the American Muslim community to do was to challenge it. So, you know, we were out there in the streets, we were holding press conferences, we were holding the commissioner to task, the mayor to task, and we filed a lawsuit. And within that lawsuit, we had one of the top-ranking NYPD officials saying that all of the surveillance that they did came up with zero leads. And so that really, you know, was very disheartening to learn, truly disheartening, because, you know, in the aftermath of 9/11, I have to give Bloomberg some credit. He tried his best to forge relationships with the American Muslim community. But once we knew that our community was being surveilled at that point, it just broke.
Yeah, trust was broken.
The trust. And it really led us to believe that we needed to fight. And, you know, whenever there are situations such as this, there was a silver lining. That silver lining was it made us realize that we had to align with other communities that were facing NYPD or
Yes.
police brutality. And
I know a community.
yes, yes. And so, so at that point, when we learned of everything that was happening with Stop and Frisk,
Yes.
a number of, you know, American Muslim activists and organizations made that their fight as well.
Yes.
And one of the things that we did collectively, both the Muslim American community and the African American community and, you know, civil rights groups, immigrant groups, and racial justice groups, was we fought long and hard with the city council to actually pass the Community Safety Act, which, you know, was able to get the city an inspector general that was to keep the NYPD, you know, on check, a number of other, you know, legislation pieces in the Community Safety Act, and then, you know, bringing to light that we needed to end Stop and Frisk.
Yes.
Well, Pastor Hart, in other ways, the city has also made it difficult to be of faith. And you actually had some interesting thoughts when we spoke about the gentrification
Yes.
complicating religion
Yes.
and complicating finding church. Can you explain that a little?
Yeah, well, for those who don't know what gentrification is, it's a pretty it's a pretty hot topic in the city. So, but the way I define it, I'm sure there's a academic definition, but I define gentrification as is the process through which money moves to the hood. That's gentrification, which on a basis makes it a class problem, not a race problem. The problem is that historically in this country, and this is where we fail in America to kind of deal with our own history, historically in this country, wealth and race have gone hand in hand. And so it creates racial tension in Harlem. And what often happens in communities of faith, now my community in Harlem, which is rapidly gentrifying, is we begin to self-segregate. It's a problem we have as human beings, period. Right? We like ourselves a lot, and so we tend to hang out with people that are like us. And so the gentrifiers who now live in Harlem drive up property value, have a nice, trendy Whole Foods that they brought with them, which also got rid of Lennox Lounge, which was a lounge right across the street that Billie Holiday sings Strange Fruit in.
is at Lennox Lounge.
It took Lennox Lounge, yeah. It raised, so literally, so just to give you guys a picture of the way gentrification destroys communities, Whole Foods moved right across the street from Lennox Lounge. Lennox Lounge is a famous lounge in Harlem. It's where Billie Holiday once sang about strange fruit on southern trees, right? And in Lennox Lounge, the rent, before Whole Foods signed their lease across the street, was $10,000 a month. It's a healthy penny, but they were able to afford it. As soon as Whole Foods penned their lease, the rent went from $10,000 to $20,000. Wow. Lennox Lounge was gone.
Well, tie it back
in
for
a
me to
heartbeat.
faith. Okay.
And so for faith, what often happens is we we because we self-segregate, we wound up changing communities, but not actually knowing our neighbors. We're not actually worshiping in the communities. And in my particular community in Harlem, it creates a racial tension in which people don't want to worship next to people who are literally forcing their grandmothers out of the neighborhood, right? And so it puts all kind of tension on faith. And I actually think it's faith that should come up with some solutions. If this faith thing is real, then we should have some solutions to problems that politics don't, and politicians don't. And so I honestly think that the faith community can galvanize change in these areas, but we have a long way to go.
What are some of your solutions?
I mean, honestly, for us, I mean, we just talk about we let the elephant out the cage. I mean, we let the gorilla out the cage. We just talk about race, and we talk about in the gathering. We don't talk about racial reconciliation, which is a popular buzz term in our culture. We talk about racial justice, because the reality is in Harlem, right? Let's just talk about Harlem. My community, where I'm from, Harlem is a racialized community. Harlem was created by racist policy. Right? This is what we get. We have to. All of this is holistic. There was this thing called redlining. It was policy in this country for over 30 years. It's where banks literally put a red line through communities of color.
And very significant in New York City.
Very significant in New York City.
Redlining was very, very significant.
And this is how Harlem became black, right? And now once we've isolated communities that we don't like, we can now also isolate or target where we send our resources. So we create these kind of laws that seem, on the surface, innocuous. Let's make the school system based on property taxes. Seems like a pretty good law, right? No. But what if you live in a community in which everyone in the community is poor, everyone lives below the poverty line, and now what does that say about the school system if the resources are going to come from the price of the land? So again, these kind of policies shape communities, and we wonder why Harlem gets this kind of reputation. And now what gentrification does is say, we want to desegregate this community.
No, they want to resegregate it, just
Right.
move them out.
That's it. We want to, but we're too kind of, we're too liberal and proper to say that. But we do want to resegregate. But on the surface, we're saying, oh, this is great. We're bringing diversity to Harlem. We're bringing diversity to Bushwick. We're bringing diversity to Bed-Stuy. But then on the surface, that looks the case. But then beneath it all, you find that you live now in the Harlem where the average household income is $21,000 a year, but the average rent is $2,400 a month. Those two numbers are unsustainable. So it puts what kind of pressure does that put on faith communities? Forget it. It's the pressure of having a mother calling me, a single mother, emailing me saying, Pastor Guy, I can't afford to live in this neighborhood. Is there anything the church can do? It's a gentrifier saying, this church is too black, this church is too brown, I don't feel safe here, I'm going to go to another church in this neighborhood. Because guess what? We can just like we can put fancy coffee shops in Harlem, we could put fancy churches in Harlem that are just for the people that are moving in. If we could put a Whole Foods there, we could put a church there, right? We could put a faith community there that can reach
The
that.
Whole Foods of churches.
Yes. But you can have your pick. And in the end, what it does is it cuts at the heart of what makes New York City great. If we love this city, we must hate gentrification. We have to. Because gentrification is targeting vulnerable communities. We have not developed a way in this city to think well about different people, about different others. Even in New York, different has often meant dangerous.
Wait. However, Rabbi Kleinbaum
Yes.
is doing something awesome about that.
Yes.
Could you please speak about House of Peace?
I would with great pleasure, but I just want to add to this. This is a global issue right now we're facing. And the issue about property taxes in schools, this is a problem that New York City has in New York State, right? It's all of New York City suffers. You go across New York City into Westchester County and look what happens to the schools there. And New York City suffers, and we could talk about New York City and New York State politics and the impact of that.
It's crazy, but we have the most segregated school system in the country. New York City, the most segregated school system in the country. Not in the Bible Belt South.
That was a different talk. You weren't here. Nicole Hannah-Jones told us all that.
She's
You've been there.
amazing.
You've been to all of them, right? You know. But please, I'd really love you to speak, and feel free to speak on whatever you want. But I want faith is about uplift, and you're doing something incredibly uplifting, Rabbi Kleinbaum. I really want to hear about it.
Well, I have to say that it came out of the election last year in November. I mean, CBST as a community of LGBT Jews who are typically experience the world on the outside and experienced all different kinds of levels of oppression. But when the election took place last year, I don't need to remind everybody in the room what that Tuesday was like and what that Wednesday was like and what the Thursday was like. And that Friday I woke up and I thought, the first thing I thought about that Friday morning is, I know that the main communal prayer service for Muslims is Friday afternoon, and I thought, how does a Muslim American wake up in America on Friday and think about going to Juma prayers, knowing that we've just put into office a president whose entire candidacy was based on a speech he gave, the speech he gave launching his presidency, the candidacy was anti-Muslim. That was his opening, introducing himself to the world. We in New York knew who he was,
Of course.
for 40 years, and thought knew he was a fraud and a quack and a con man. But the way he introduced himself to the world was to say he was anti-Muslim. That was his. And I thought to myself, I just woke up thinking, okay, I feel vulnerable as a gay person and as a Jew, as a woman in America, but my God, how does a Muslim American feel this morning? And I called up a few members of our clergy at CBST, at the synagogue, and I said, meet me at this mosque that I have a relationship with, right before Juma prayers, and let's bring roses and just stand there with signs. And I brought one of the signs that we just made these signs on the subway going downtown that just, this is my handwriting, I just made these signs. What did I want to say on that Friday for Juma prayers? Pretty simple. Jews support our Muslim friends. Wow. And we just went down to the mosque and stood in front of the building in which the prayers were taking place, just with these signs, and I could see Muslims coming to prayer, like seeing a group gathered, and wondering, is this, are they here? Is this going to be? And you could see fear on their faces. I thought, what kind of America are we living in that people coming to prayer are afraid? And as soon as they saw this, we got hugs and kisses, and people were so moved and wanted their selfie taken with the picture and to send to their mother to say, look, this is also America. And then we started, from the inauguration, we've been there every single Friday.
Some of those people are in
Some
the
of
audience,
those people
so
are
a little
here.
round of
Harold
applause
Levine,
for
who
those
is the
people.
chair of the committee.
That's awesome.
And we have a group here.
That's awesome.
And we realized, this is where I'd say where there's the silver lining, is that we realized, yes, we've lived happily with our Muslim neighbors, but we don't know enough. So we started classes at CBST about Islam 101 and Islam 102 and Islam 103. We brought Debbie Almontaser in to teach about bystander training, how to be an upstander, not a bystander.
Wow.
We've had all different, we now have a group that meets every single Friday in front of the mosque, and with the permission of the community there, we send a few people into the prayer service itself, so we will learn about their services and have volunteered at the iftar meals during Ramadan, and this Yom Kippur services for high holidays, young people from the mosque volunteered to be ushers at the CBST's high holiday services, helping to hand out the prayer books and help people to their seats, and especially helping with our people in wheelchairs and who had accessibility. And we had them light the candles for the most holy day in the entire Jewish calendar. We asked these 4 young people, Muslim young people, to light the candles. And I feel like this is what religion needs to be. And shame on us that it took Trump to really get us to be at this level. We always were, but the amount that our congregation has now learned and our people now understand about Islam, if you ask most people about somebody else's religion, even in America, we know very little. Most American Jews know very little about Christianity, and that's the dominant religion. And we just know very little about each other. And that effort to actually try and get deeper, sometimes it takes this crisis. And in 6 months into our standing every Friday in front and we said to the staff of the mosque, listen, we don't want to wear out our welcome. Are you sick of us yet? We're happy. We don't want to be doing this for, is this just something? Because we feel so great afterwards, like we've done something in Trump's America where we feel so helpless. We feel like we've stood up on a street with a sign. And by the way, we make sure we're on the street so everybody sees us standing there. And we say to ourselves, I was in Berlin this summer, and I spoke at a multi-faith gay pride service in a 13th century church in what was East Berlin, where Martin Luther King spoke in 1964 and gave his famous Love Conquers Walls speech when the wall was, of course, up. Yeah. And I stood there, and I gave a speech for this Berlin LGBT, and it wasn't just an LGBT group, it was every Christian group in Berlin was there. And I said, do you know what would it have been if in Berlin in 1932, Germans stood in front of synagogues in 1932, before it got so bad, when there was terrible anti-Jewish rhetoric, even then, before it had become violent, but with signs said, we Germans support our Jewish neighbors, and we're standing on the street, and we're visible doing it. And because of that experience of ours as Jews, and we know what it is for neighbors to turn away when violence is done to us, and we know what it's like that our families were grabbed and taken out of apartment buildings and taken off of trains and taken off of buses and taken out of schools and arrested from schools. What are we doing now? If we can't be the presence we had hoped for us, then what is our faith? It's nothing.
That's good.
It means nothing.
That's so good.
And so that's why CBST has become a sanctuary synagogue, and we're very active in the new sanctuary movement. And we stand there every single Friday. And now so the mosque folks said to us, no, we want you to stay. You haven't worn out your welcome yet. And by the way, it doesn't mean, and the imam there spoke at CBST for our gay pride service. I've spoken at the imam. Dr. Almontaser is a regular at CBST. In fact, Mayor de Blasio, seeing her so many times at CBST on so many occasions, said, are you a member at CBST? And I think that's what it's about, is really building deep relationships.
That's it.
And partly to say, look, things are going to get worse in America. If we think we've hit rock bottom, we have not. It's going to get bad. But the one thing that we have, the one weapon that we have is love that cannot be touched by the ugliness of what's happening in America.
I'm going to contradict you. I don't think we have one weapon. I think we have three. Thank you so much. And now, since we're celebrating, faith and stuff, I wanted to celebrate. You might not know, it's actually a special holiday here at the Museum of the City of New York. That holiday is my co-curator, Frans Rosenfeld's birthday.
Yay!
So we have some cake.
Happy birthday, Fran.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Come on, get your cake, Fran. Louder, everyone. Happy birthday, dear Fran. Happy birthday to you.
And we'd like to give this to the museum as an artifact.
We will accept it into our collection. Oh, quick, Fran. Oh. 1, 2, 3, make a wish. Woo!
Thank you very much, really.
Thank you.